Organizational, institutional, constitutional. Hi. Hi, Chief. What'd you say? What did you say? Feels cold. I'm pretty sure I wrote them down in my notes, even as I was going through the slides. Actually, I was going to point out that Leslie and Dero are here, and that Caitlin Greenwald and Mary Byron, part of the year, all live in the Western region. Doesn't Mary Byron live in Montana half the year? So, anyway, I thought I might just point out that, like, not only that, Pacific Western region, lots of leadership. For People's Campaign, I don't have that. I'm gonna look behind the stage. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk until I think the mic is there. It goes. All right. Hi. You can hear me back there. Yay. All right. Hey, Ron. Nice to see you. So I'm Susan Frederick Gray. I'm the president of the UUA. Thank you. I'm here to share some about the work at the UUA, what's going on, some of the early work around mission and vision at the UUA, and some of the work for the long-term institutional change that we're doing. And before I get started, I want to introduce to you, I want to invite members of the UUA staff who are here in this room to just stand up. I work with an incredible team at the UUA, which includes the regional staff, but there's also a number of UUA national staff that are here. And so Elaine McCardle works for the UU World. And Tandy Rogers and Christine Robinson are here in the region, and were introduced yesterday, and you all probably see them a lot. This is Carrie McDonald. Carrie McDonald is the Chief Operations Officer at the UUA. So, and Carrie so we're a team. He's like the number 2 at the UUA, right? And we're just together, we are working so collaboratively and with a lot of strategy behind our work. And I just can't say enough about the skills, commitment, passion, and talent that Carrie brings to the UUA. And we are so lucky that you are the COO. So thank you, Carrie. Marche Greer is our Director of Public Witness and Outreach. She does our public relations work. And Marche came to the UUA in January, so a new hire for us. And Marche is fabulous and really helping us think strategically about our communications broadly from the UUA. So welcome, say hi to Marche. Brent Lewis over here is the executive director to the president. And so if you ever need to reach me, you should reach Brent. He handles my schedule and calendaring and just so many things, but is a great person to start with if you ever have questions, because he can help you talk to the person you need to talk to or have a chance to talk with me. So thank you, Brent, and it's wonderful to work with you. Thank you for your support. And Vale Weller lives in the Western region. Woohoo! Everyone on UUA national staff doesn't live in Boston. We actually have national staff all over the country. Vale is the director of congregational giving for the UUA, and so really leads the annual program fund, which is the gifts that your congregations make to the UUA. Thank you. So thank you all for being here. And I just want to tell you how grateful I am to work with a fabulous staff. And again, how grateful I am to be here in the Pacific Western region. It really does feel like a homecoming. And so thank you all for coming again today and being curious about the inside work of the UUA. I want to say, I have a slideshow. So this is not going to be me preaching. This is going to be more
numbers, thoughts about what's happening. And if you just want to start the first slide, not just the opening shot, that one. This has been really an incredible year at the UUA and a difficult one. And the presidency, as you all know, started in the midst of a lot of turmoil with the resignation of our previous president, Peter Morales. And so one of the things that I am very much focused on this year especially is tending to relationship. I believe that we have much to do and a long way to go in our faith around internal change, but also being a part of the larger movement work around the country. And I don't believe that we can go far if we don't have trust and relationship with one another, that's actually a condition for moving change. And I found that in parish life, in congregational life, that a sense of covenant and right relationship within is really important to being able to go forward together in a clear mission. And so my primary priority this year has been trying to strengthen the relationships across the UUA. And so we just have a few pictures from my Facebook page about some of the ways that I've focused on relationship, but really I've tried to be accessible, to attend, be at religious professional gatherings, to be in congregations as much as I'm able. And these two pictures, the one on the left, or your left, is from Memphis. A couple weeks ago, I was with the Memphis the Church of the River, and I was there as part of the commemorative events honoring the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, and was there also with the Poor People's Campaign and with William Barber. And so that's one picture with Southern UU ministers showing up at that event. And the other picture is from Nepal, Kathmandu, Nepal, where I was gathered with international Unitarians and Universalists from all over the world. And it was absolutely incredible. There were about 100 people there from all over the world, from the Philippines and Indonesia and Africa and Canada and the United States and Europe and India. But one of the things that was so inspiring is that a third of the people there were young adults. Young adult Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists from around the country. It was absolutely incredible to see these leaders articulate the absolute relevance and critical need of our faith, our liberating faith all around the globe. So that is, and I will share with you that the relationship part is also the piece that gives me some of the most joy in this job, because I'm inspired by you. I fall in love with Unitarian Universalism all over again when I'm at these gatherings or I'm in congregations and hearing people talk about what is moving their hearts and what they love about this faith. So thank you for being here and doing this every day in your congregations. Okay, so now just into a little bit of the deep work of the UUA. Next slide. One of the things that we started right away early in the presidency was a strategic review of our public witness work. So recognizing how important justice work is right now, we wanted to look at how we're communicating about the justice work we do, as well as how we more powerfully amplify the national voice of our faith. So we've been reimagining public prophetic witness and bringing both our communication department and our public and our justice departments together so that we can think together about how we amplify our national voice. I feel like that's one thing that the UUA does on behalf of all of us, is tries to share our values and our religious voice nationally, which I hope helps all of you as people come and look for Unitarian Universalism when they see us in the news and when they see our voice out there. So we've been working hard to try to make that stronger, and we still have lots of work to do, but it's been a key priority. We are also looking at a new framework around partnership and impact. So how can we make some very clear commitments around justice work where we want to be focused over the long term? And we're looking at intersectional priorities, issues that connect race and class, poverty, gender equity, climate change, issues where things really connect. And so the areas we're looking at are around criminal justice, climate justice, and we say climate justice because it's not just about, it's about actually doing climate justice work in partnership with communities of color and indigenous communities. And then gender and LGBTQ equity work, and another piece for its 2018 election year focus. So, we've been looking at 2 states in particular right now, Florida and Ohio, which both have ballot initiative measures that are about expanding voting rights and democracy. So we're not looking at this in a candidate-focused way, but actually out of our principle of the commitment to democracy. And so Florida has a ballot measure that will re-enfranchise felons. So they have a law that if you have been convicted of a felony, you never get to vote again. And so we are trying to find ways that we can support some of that work and maybe even invite UUs around the country to support some of that work. So again, we're trying to be focused on impact and the place where our efforts can add to your efforts locally. And that also includes the Poor People's Campaign. How many people here are connecting to the Poor People's Campaign in your own area? All right, that's fantastic. And so I hope you know that there's a big date coming up, May 14th, which is the Monday after Mother's Day, and call for action across the country. I will be with Dr. Barber in DC on that day, and I know many of you will be in your own state capitals on that day. So I'm just thrilled to see the way Unitarian Universalists around the country are connecting to that work. All right, next slide. So another primary focus of the work at the UUA is countering white supremacy culture. Last spring, we as Unitarian Universalists were called to deeply grapple with our own bias and discrimination in our institution, the culture of white supremacy in Unitarian Universalism. So at the UUA, we are taking this very seriously, and we're working on it on 3 levels. Organizationally, that's like at the UUA itself. Congregationally, that's how we help provide resources and support congregations in doing this work. And then institutionally, which is just thinking about the broader landscape of Unitarian Universalism. So at the UUA, we are talking about this work in the frame of inclusion, equity, and change. And Taquina Boston, who has been and is the director of multicultural growth and witness at the UUA, she's now has a job where she's working directly with the president and as the special advisor to the president for for inclusion, equity, and change. And I'm going to share some slides that she recently offered for the Board of Trustees about this work. Part of the reason for this position is that I believe this work of cultural change has to live at the center of the UUA, right? Our work around multicultural growth can't just be a separate department of the UUA. It's actually a lens that we need to bring to all that we do. And so Taquina, Taquina is helping us do that by working closely with Carrie and myself, and then bringing resources to all of our departments to look at their departments and the way they work with this lens of equity and inclusion. And so one of the things we're starting with is defining where we want to go and being specific about where we want to go. I sometimes am asked about congregational growth and health, and I think that there are 2 things that are really essential to congregational growth. And the first is having clear processes and good relationships across the congregation, really having healthy, transparent ways of operating so that new people can find their way in and find a way to make a difference by being a part of the community. And then the second thing is being clear about mission and understanding that you have a calling beyond yourselves and beyond just serving the people already in our congregations. That sense of calling, I think, is key to really helping us grow and be healthier and stronger as a faith movement. So we have defined a destination for the UUA on this organizational change work. We seek to create a UUA that reflects the aspirations of Unitarian Universalism as a beloved, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural faith community. And we seek to create a UUA in which people of color and others of marginalized identities thrive. So this is what our goals are at the UUA. Some of the ways that we've specifically been focused in this work is we have reviewed our hiring practices and procedures. If you read the Commission on Institutional Change's report about the hiring and last spring, which then resulted in a lot of resignations at the UUA, one of the things that was clear in that report was that things were being handled very informally. And think about this in your own congregations, about how informal processes benefit people who already have power in the system. That's why new people struggle to figure out how to make a difference in a church. It's why sometimes folks are always on the margins and don't feel like they can make their voices heard in setting the direction of the congregation. And so we have reviewed all of our hiring procedures, done training for hiring managers. We have a practice of having diverse hiring panels when we're engaged in hiring. And we also put in our personnel manual a clear articulation of these goals and this vision of who we're called to be. Because you don't have to be a UU to work for the UUA, but you do need to be on board for this work of leading in an anti-oppressive way and helping our faith be an anti-oppressive faith. And so again, I think whenever we are clear about who we are called to be and who we want to be, it helps people be a part of that change and be a part of that work. We also are using new models of leadership. We've been experimenting with collaborative leaders. So one of the things that happened shortly after Carrie came on board is that for the Ministries and Faith Development Department of the UUA, we now have co-directors, Sarah Lammert and Jessica York, who are also, one is a minister and one is a religious educator. And again, this is an area of tension that's been alive in our faith, about mutual professional respect across our different collegial groups. And so this model in the Ministries and Faith Development Department, having this co-leadership team, I hope is modeling some of the ways that we're trying to move forward at the UUA. We also have co-regional leads in the Southern region. So we've been experimenting. Next year, we have put aside money for significant investment in training our staff around bias, around how to support congregations that are going through conflict, particularly conflict that touches on issues of race, gender, identity. And so, we've realized we have not been focused on this skill building across our faith. So that is a key priority for next year. And then another thing, I'm a metrics person. So in addition to the ministry, I have this degree in molecular biology. I love science and math and all those kinds of things. And metrics matter because what you pay attention to generally grows. What you give, there's I think it's Marge Piercy who says, attention is love. What you pay attention to, you love, and it grows. And so we are actually trying to put some metrics to really pay attention to the diversity of our faith, the diversity of our religious professionals, to track the success of the ministries of our religious professionals of color or those who have marginalized identities, so we can see how the work that we're seeking to do is actually making an impact. We've been for so long relying on anecdotal stories and not actually taking good data about how our movement is changing or how the efforts that we're trying to do around change are having an impact. So we've set aside some new metrics about how we're going to live into the beloved community. And then finally, we are trying to really change the culture of the UUA. So there's a great document that came out of the white supremacy teach-in about a white normative dominant culture, white supremacy culture, and sort of what the traits are. So if you think, what does that word mean? There's a great document. Is that held on the Black Lives of UU site? Yeah, so Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, you can find this document. We actually had our IT department looked at their department along this lens and found that we hit every one of these, right? And so we're looking at that and deciding to make some intentional changes around culture. Just to give you a few, moving from individualism and a focus on individual leaders to collaborative and collective sensibility, as well as covenant, and being mindful that we're not individuals, we're actually held in a covenant together. Another one is about intentionally trying to practice more gratitude as a spiritual discipline. This comes out of Juana Borges's book on Salsa, Soul, and Spirit, what leadership looks like in multicultural communities. And she says gratitude is the foundation. It reminds us that we're not here alone. None of us got here on our own. And gratitude reminds us how dependent we are on one another, on this earth, on life itself. And so we're trying to foster that beginning with gratitude in our work, as well as trying to make room for healthy conflict. One of the things in that cultural piece is about conflict avoidance and how we actually speak the truth to one another in covenant, which is not about shame and blame. It's about truth telling and sharing ourselves and learning from one another and becoming better at the skills we have to live into a multicultural community and culturally adaptive community. So those are just some specifics about that cultural change work we're doing. A lesson that we're trying to learn from, we actually, in the midst of everything that happened in the spring, there was a consulting firm, Cook Ross, that works with huge organizations, nonprofits, and corporations about diversity and culture change. And they called us and said, would you like some nonprofit support or pro bono support? We'd really like to work with you and help you. We saw you in the news. We think we could help. And so some of our top leadership have met with the leaders of Cook Ross. And then one of the things we looked at is, where has the UUA made a huge change? And the staff said the move from 25 Beacon to the new building in 24 Farnsworth. Part of what happened with that move is the values of who we wanted to be as Unitarian Universalists were put at the front. The values of collaboration, the values of openness and innovation were put up front, and that led the decisions around the move. And so there's the picture of 25 Beacon, and there's a picture inside the new UUA offices where it's open space. All of our staff that are in Boston can be in one building as opposed to across 4 or 5 around Beacon Hill. It really allows a lot more collaboration. And then Zoom, like technology everywhere. And so it is rare that we have a meeting at the UUA where someone isn't in that meeting from offsite. And they may be in another country or in another state, but they can Zoom in. So the technology is allowing this greater accessibility to the UUA and greater connection. So we're really learning from some of that change work around how we think about how we change our internal institution, not the external walls. So that's been really helpful. And I really do want to acknowledge that I think that move was really important. And I want to lift up the leadership of Peter Morales in helping our association move in a new direction and give us some opportunities. Financially, I think it was a really healthy and smart move. And I think how it allows us to connect and work together will continue to be really important for the work that we're trying to do now. Okay, so that was sort of like how we're trying to do the work internally at the UUA. Another piece of how we're trying to do the work is institutionally and change our broader institution. So one of the ways this is happening is around the board and senior staff, the president and the COO and CFO's role together. That has been fractured for a long time. The relationship between the board and the president. This wasn't about last spring. It's been an ongoing thing where And the problem is it's really hard to move forward, as I said, if you don't have trust and strong relationship and feel like you're in it together and on the same page. So the co-moderators of the UUA, there's another place where we're experimenting with different leadership, Barb Grieve and Alandria Williams, and myself as president and Carrie McDonald as COO. We are really trying to build new practices, processes, and a culture of covenant in the relationship between the board and the senior staff. And it takes time. Thank you for the clap. And it takes time because, again, this has been an issue that's has been real for a long time. And so we're really trying to, and that takes time, building something new, rebuilding relationship after crisis, and a difficult transition. You know that in your churches, if you've had difficult transitions with leaders, it takes time and it takes a lot of intention. And so that's a key piece of this larger institutional work. The Commission on Institutional Change, the UUA is supporting the work of the Commission on Institutional Change, which is looking not just at the hiring. They just finished their report on the hiring. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you read it. I think it's instructive, not just for the UUA, but for our congregations. And now they are turning their attention to the broader landscape of Unitarian Universalism, and will look at the experiences of lay leaders of color and religious professionals of color in our movement. And I want to lift up that Leslie Takahashi, who's the chair of the commission, is here, as well as Jero Farrar is doing the music. And I don't know that he's in the room, but he's also here at the assembly. Thank you, Leslie, for your leadership. And just as a little shout out to all of you here in the PWR and the Power region, I was thinking about it, and Leslie Takahashi, Jero Farrar, Caitlin Breedlove, and Mary Byron, 4 of the 6 members. Mary is in Montana some of the year. 4 of the 6 commission members are all here from the PWR region. So thank you for your leadership in moving and supporting this institutional change work. And for those of you who have, for those of you in congregations where you have folks serving in this way, I just want to say thank you for supporting your leaders in providing national leadership for our faith. I know it's a sacrifice when congregations do that. I said that to the leaders of the Portland church who loaned Bill Sinkford to the UUA. What a difference. Like, how important that was. What a difference that made to all of us as Unitarian Universalists that congregation did that. And it is a sacrifice for them to share their leaders in that way. So to all of you who are doing that, who are supporting your professional religious leaders in providing larger associational leadership, it really matters. Thank you. And then a third piece of larger institutional work is the work of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism and the Promise and the Practice campaign, which is the UUA's campaign to fund Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. So this was a board commitment made last fall, and the Promise and the Practice campaign is the UUA's response to that. Our goal is $5.3 million to fund the ministry of Black Lives of UU. Now, there's 3 things that Black Lives of UU does, their core work. Number 1, it is providing pastoral religious ministry and care to Black UUs all around the country. So they have a minister for spiritual leadership that's a part of Blue. And actually, I will lift up that the Blue members of Blue are meeting right now in Kansas City this weekend for a revival. So they're providing worship and spiritual community and pastoral care for Black UUs all across the country. Number 2, they are helping to amplify and support and elevate Black leadership in Unitarian Universalism and supporting Black leaders who are giving larger leadership to the association. So that's their second priority. And then number 3 is being a bridge to bring Unitarian Universalist theology into the movement for Black lives. So many of the leaders, including Lena Gardner, who's the executive director, is a young organizer, right? So the idea is to bring some of Unitarian Universalist theology and spiritual foundation into the larger work of the movement for Black lives on the national scene, right? So a bridge into communities and leaders who may not be familiar with Unitarian Universalism, but where our theology can be a source of renewal and resilience for organizers. So that's what Blue does. And I want to share with you that how many of your congregations have participated in the Promise and the Practice campaign? All right, thank you so much. So far, we have raised almost $2.8 million towards this $5.3 million goal for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. Yes, give yourselves a hand. $1 million of this was an investment from the UUA, recognizing that this, we had to be in it at the UUA level. Then there was a grant from generous donors to the UUA of $1 million to match congregational giving to this campaign. Now, there's a threshold for this giving. This gift from the Bradford family will match congregational giving that reaches a level of $10 per member. So y'all probably know your rough membership number. You can do the math in your head, multiplying by 10. And that gift, we are asking congregations to make their pledges this year, by the end of June, this fiscal year, to make your pledge. But you can actually collect money and raise money for Blue over the next, over next year. Okay, so you can do this over 2 years. And we have, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I know we've raised about $500,000 through this of congregational giving that then is matched. So, and I have flyers here for Blue. For that campaign. And one of the things I want to lift up is that I have heard so many individual congregations reach back to the UUA and tell us how powerful their Promise and the Practice service was. All of the materials for this worship service are available online, and they've all been written by religious professionals of color. So in doing the service, you are hearing the voices, the leadership, and the vision of UUs of color. And people have just been testifying to how meaningful and transformative that's been. So I encourage you to look there, and there's some materials up here. We are also, so that's sort of the way that we're working on institutional change. And then congregational change is the next piece. And again, I want to highlight the work of the commission that's really talked about how the change, like the deep change that's going to move our faith forward, is going to happen in our congregations. I said that, that's where people find our faith. It's where they're changed by our faith. It's where they find, we hope, a home in our faith. So that's where the real change work needs to continue. So we've been focusing on a few things about congregations, but we have much more to do. And we know that this is the next piece of our work from the UUA, is really supporting congregations in this work. But a few ways in which we're looking at it is to help congregations change their culture. One is through training and programming and making resources available for congregations that want to engage this work and the change. Some of those resources are online. We'll be working on coaching with leaders and congregations. As I said earlier, we're investing in training, especially for UUA staff that work directly with congregations, like our congregational life staff and our ministries and faith development staff. And then finally, we're looking at how we provide stronger direct support for religious professionals of color. This happens through gatherings that we have for religious professionals of color, but we're also looking at providing startup resources, being more intentional for congregations if they're calling a minister of color, or if a staff team is racially diverse or has identity diversity on the staff, how we provide support in advance, in the beginning, that are going to help those teams and those leaders and congregations thrive. All right. Now, the last thing is about giving and generosity. So you heard me say something last night, I hope a few things, about this is no time for a casual faith or a casual commitment to your faith. Nothing is possible at the UUA without your support. There are three really critical things that the UUA does. And I think about the work of the UUA in terms of what can the UUA do that no individual congregation can do. right? Like, what is our larger work? Number one, we provide broad support for congregational health and vitality. That includes transitions work. When you're looking for ministers, the UUA provides the resources to help congregations find ministers. It includes the OWL curriculum, right? The comprehensive sexuality curriculum. It provides so much of our RE curriculum. It can provide crisis support like hurricane relief and relief after the fires in California, as well as support when congregations are in crisis or conflict. So that is one of our key missional priorities at the UUA, equipping congregations for health and vitality. The next thing we do is we equip leaders for this time. So if you are served by a religious professional, your religious professional has had some support, connection, resources, continuing education from the UUA. That's a key next part of our job, is helping to train both lay and professional leadership for our movement and for the future. And then number 3 is raising that national voice on behalf of our values and helping to bring national resources to support in local and national and international justice issues. So those are the 3 ways that the UUA is seeking to amplify and strengthen both our congregations, our leadership, and then our values in the world. Now, if you want to make a difference in Unitarian Universalism, how many of you want to make a difference in Unitarian Universalism? The most important way that you can financially support this faith is through your gifts, your generosity to your congregations. Again, that is where people find Unitarian Universalism. Your generosity to your congregations is the most important thing. Now, for the UUA, nationally, the most important thing is your congregations giving to the UUA. That's the biggest source of income for our annual operating budget, is the APF, the Annual Program Fund. Now, there is a lay leader in Phoenix who, when he gave his stewardship testimony, he said, and he was someone who had made a huge transition in his own life in giving and understanding giving at a percentage level and really making the church a priority in his giving. And he said, I give not because of what I get back from the church, but I give because I recognize that the church is making a difference in the lives of people who I will never know. It is touching the lives of children I won't know. Families I may not meet. I won't hear all the stories of the ways that this congregation is making a difference. Stories of activists out in the streets who found support and water and care or sanctuary in a church. So when you think about the APF in your congregation, what I want to say to you is that when you are giving to the UUA, you are making a difference in the lives of congregations and Unitarian Universalists who you will never meet. And you will never know all the ways that the UUA has shown up in support of congregations all across this country. And that ultimately, when we think about our UUA, I hope you will think about it as a covenant. A covenant that's not just about your relationship to the UUA, but your relationship to one another as a collective faith. So know that in the small congregation that has OWL, it's because of your generosity to the UUA. And a church that's calling its first minister, they're getting support because of your gifts to the UUA. And may you all at some time be on the receiving end of that love of your larger faith when you need it. Good news is that APF is up. We went through this. I mean, your generosity is already coming through. There's a couple slides on this. You can see, I don't know that you can read this, but from 2017 to 2018, you can see it's almost $500,000 more at this time than it was last year at this time. So, after the spring of last year, and we're on like the year anniversary of that, we've been really mindful of that in the UUA. There is strength in our faith. There is confidence in where we're going, and there's buy-in towards that, and we see that through the APF. So, and I think people really are taking to heart that in this time we can't be in it alone, right? We can't just be isolated congregations. We've got to be stronger and support one another in the work we're doing all across the country. So thank you for your generosity. And there's another slide that just shows how well the PWR region in particular is doing. And the bottom is Central East, but then PWR is the next most generous region to the UUA. So thank you. Thank you for that generosity, and give yourselves a hand for that. I know I'm getting into detail here, so I hope some of you want to hear lots of this detail. But the APF is changing. How many people know the APF is changing? A few hands, that's good. And so we have already rolled out the new APF in in the New England region, in the Central East region, and in the Southern region. And we are working with the boards in this region and the board, there's just one Mid-America board, to launch the new APF in this region in 2020, in fiscal year 2020. So not this next year, but the one after it. But there is something new for your regions this year, that you will get a one-check ask, right? So typically you've gotten two asks, one for the district and one for the UUA, and that's now just going to be one combined check, right? So it is for two pots, but we're just asking you to make one contribution to the UUA to support both work. But our goal is to roll out the new APF in the Pacific Western in 2020. And there's a lot of detail, and you're going to get information in October, and you can ask Vail about it. But the Southern region, it was experimental in not making the giving to the UUA based on number of members, right? So it's always been an amount per member, which has an impact of making us feel very scarce about membership, right? And what we're doing now, is actually doing it based on congregations' budgets, and so their capacity to give. Based on their expenses, it'll be a percentage. And there will be some factors, because we recognize that, every congregation does have slightly different circumstances. So there'll be a couple of ways in which that might be adjusted. And then the other thing is, if your ask goes up, we are asking congregations, and we are putting what's called a collar, that no one will be asked to give more than 10% their ask. Now, you may not give the full ask right now, so the ask may seem a lot compared to what you give, but we won't be asking for more than 10% of what we asked the year before, if that makes sense. And so it's a slow increase if it ends up being a big change. Similarly, if it goes down based on this calculation, we will ask congregations not to lower their giving more than 10% each year, so as not to impact the overall ability of the UUA to provide services to congregations. And we believe that this will provide more equitable and sustainable income for the UUA, and is a better reflection of our covenant with one another as religious communities, to do it based on what our congregations have and their capacity to pay, not on number of members. So there'll be more information, and you can talk to Vail Weller and find resources on the UUA's website if you need more information. Now, if you give generously to your congregation, and your congregation gives generously to the UUA, and you still have capacity to give to this faith, there are ways that you can directly give to the UUA. And so I just want to make you aware of them. We have two categories of folks who give to the UUA. One is friends of the UUA. Those are people who respond to the ask letters and make a one-time gift to the UUA. We also have a program called Faithful Sustainers, and those are folks who make a monthly regular gift to the UUA and commit to making that gift ongoing every month. And it was great. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a call inviting all of our faithful sustainers into the call, and people got to submit questions in advance. But I'm trying to really do more to reach out and build relationship with the donors who give directly to the UUA. And we have people who give $5 a month to the UUA and people who give over $1,000 a month to the UUA. So I invite you to think about that, and I have cards with faithful sustainers and some stickers up here to give out to folks. So come visit the table if you're able. Again, I want to just say, like, what an enormous privilege and honor it is to serve our faith in this way. And I do believe that we have much to offer and much that is needed from us in this time. And I am so excited to work with all of you in the work that is ahead. And I need your help. I need your help to make it real. And so your gifts to the UUA through your congregation and individually, they are what make our mission possible. Your generosity powers the UUA. And this is no time for a casual commitment to our values or our communities. The Congresswoman spoke to this morning when she talked about, well, actually, it was a small group. I got to meet with her before she talked with all of you. And she said, your churches are so important because part of the work that we really need to do is recover our humanity in all this. Like, we really need a stronger spiritual foundation for the work. And that's a key piece of who we are and what we do as religious communities. So I thank you for your generosity. I invite you to think about giving even more generously to your own congregations. And if you are willing and able, I invite you to be a donor to the UUA. What did you show me? Oh, and many thanks. That's my Bitmoji right there. Many thanks. And so we have time for some questions. I think there's a microphone in the room. So if there are folks who have questions, and I want to say if there's any youth or young adult in the room or people of color in the room and you have a question, I'd like for us to use what's called a progressive stack, which just means, like, let's just wait a minute before the first question comes. And if there is youth, young adult, person of color, with person who lives with a disability, if you I want to just give a little space and invite you to ask a question first.
Seeing none yet. Reverend Eric Poza, Olympia, UU Congregation, Olympia, Washington. Thank you, Reverend Frederick Gray.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated you particularly lifting up the report of the Commission on Institutional Change. There's also been a recent report that I'd be curious to hear your response to from the Presidential Search Committee.
So there were actually two reports, one from the Presidential Search Committee and one from the Election Campaign Practices Committee. I mean, one thing I want to lift up is this was an entirely new process of having a search committee. And so, that there were mistakes and learnings and all of that is to be expected. A couple things that they lifted up in the report that I think are important for us to think about is, number one, the fact that we had a presidential search committee, but we also had this nominating by petition. We really had two systems, and to invite us to think more deeply about whether or not we should have two systems or we should just agree to one. The other thing, they talked about a shorter election cycle, and I would support that, having been through the campaign. I didn't necessarily agree with their particular recommendation about when the election would happen, because the whole process seemed to be the same length. They kind of shifted it around, but I think we should really think about how we can have something like a 6 or 9 month campaign as opposed to an 18-month campaign. I think that would be more humane. for both the leaders and the congregations if they're ministers in congregations. So I thought that those two things were really helpful. My hope is that, we have a lot to do. And so my hope is, and I think the work on the commission, the work with the commission, the work of Blue, first of all, the work of the commission should continue and inform some of these larger change questions that we have, and that in a year or so, we should form a group to really sit down and look at the election again and think about what are some better practices for the next time.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Pease. I'm from Richmond, California. I'm long time involved in social justice work. And my question has to do with how the UUA and all the many other ways that our congregations do social justice work, for example, through the state action networks, through the nonprofits that are based in our movement, and the interfaith organizations that are increasingly important. And all of those are competing for congregational dollars. How can we maximize the cost effectiveness and the sustainability of these different modes of public and community ministry?
Yeah. What a great question. Thank you, Eleanor. I don't know all the answers, right? It's one of the dangers of this job is that thought that I might, but a question I have is about whether or not we should really look at that justice landscape. The UUA, our congregations, the statewide networks, some of the key nonprofits that are part of our faith, and do to figure out where we actually have a lot of capacity, where we have common commitments. So we have different folks in different parts of the country really working on the same issue. How can we create more collaboration so that we're actually pulling together? And I think it's important not to just be so narrowly focused that you're only working on one thing, but we are looking at these intersectional priorities that we think are going to touch a number of issues. And what would it mean for across a number of states and the UUA and some of our congregations to actually take on the issue of criminalization, for example, and say, we're just really going to try to move in the same direction in partnership with groups around this work. And so that we can build our capacity by actually being more strategic and figuring out where we're placed, where we're positioned to make a difference. And another strategic question I like to ask is, where is no other faith community showing up? So our moral voice really matters. And that's certainly the case on issues of transgender equity and GLBT equality. And so thinking about that is another piece of the strategy. But I don't know how we make that happen. But I think doing kind of an assessment and sort of understanding how we're positioned could help us actually make some strategic decisions together, and that might help our impact.
Hi, my name is Oliver. I go to Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Port Townsend, Washington. And I just wanted to really briefly express my gratitude that I have for the UUA, specifically around the youth programs provided by the UUA and regionally. Because not only is Con great, not only is Goldmine great, and allowing youth to have their own program at this event itself is fantastic, but specifically the OWL program is something that I'm personally really, really grateful for. I'm trans, and I've been a UU for 10 years. And so I went from in a church identifying as female to identifying as male, and I was really highly supported. But I only really came to that conclusion because I had the accessibility to education through OWL, which I think is really important. And I didn't receive it through school sex ed. And it's something that's really vital to me that is going to continue to happen, because education and normalization of being queer and being trans is what leads to queer youth and trans youth being safe, and it reduces the risk of suicide, and it reduces the risk of all these things that we are in the demographic more likely to be affected by. And I'm just very, very grateful for OWL in particular.
Thank you, Oliver.
Hi, Susan. My name's Allie Tharp. I'm the program director with Ministry for Earth. And I know climate justice is one of the priorities that you mentioned, and I wanted to ask you to say a bit more about what your hopes and your vision for our climate justice ministries in this term of yours are, and also in a more long-term sense, what your dream and your vision for Unitarian Universalist climate justice ministries looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Allie. I think you should answer that question. I think it has to be intersectional. I mean, a piece of my vision is that it's deeply grounded in support and partnership with Indigenous communities and communities of color who are on, I mean, sometimes it's called fence line communities, right? Communities that are living near toxic waste and facilities that are damaging their local communities, polluting people's bodies. So I think like it's intersectional. I would like to see it. I think that we are not going to fight extraction industries through policy alone. I'll just say that like we have a do nothing Congress, right? And so like immigration, it's the same thing. Like we never going to get, I'm not saying we never will get, but when there was all that push to get it out of Republican Congress, that was not going to happen for immigrants, and it's still not happening. And so I do think we need deeper levels of risk and engagement with most impacted communities where it really becomes personal, and we're showing up not out of an academic commitment, but out of a deeply human commitment. And, you know, spiritually, we have to deepen our theological understanding of our dependence on the earth and our commitment to the earth. So I don't have all the strategy answers, but like those are things that are important to me. And honestly, I want to keep the conversation happening with Ministry for the Earth and with your work, Allie, about how we shape that. We have increased staffing a small bit at the UUA, which is about the partnership with the groups that came out of Standing Rock. So we are continuing that work. And I think it has to be collaborative and in partnership and intersectional. But what it all looks like, you know, I want to be in conversation with you and others. And I know you're working closely with the UUA and Public Witness around this, but it's still an active question for me about what that looks like long term. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Susan. I'm Ross Quinn. I'm from the Unitarian Universalist Society of the High Desert in Victorville, California, and a former board member of Camp Diviniville Pines. We welcome you back anytime.
Thank you.
But my question is metrics. I too am interested in metrics. I want to know, as a former LRYer and longtime UU, what are the metrics on our children? Are we losing our youth as much as it seems that we are? Do we have numbers? Do we know what the research is about that? It's so concerning to me.
Right. So our numbers around religious education enrollment and registration have been down and have been going down for some time. And, you know, one of the things we think right now, we actually are able to show a little bit of membership growth this year, but that's adult membership. We're not sure that that's going to be mirrored in our children's ministry. So that's the answer to your question about the metrics. Let me share a few thoughts, if I might.
Please.
one story isn't everything. I understand that. But we did have this experience in the Phoenix congregation where we did a big push around stewardship, and we increased staffing for religious education. We increased our investment for religious education. And I think we increased it by about, 25%. And that first year, we saw a 20% increase in children's participation. So we know in our congregations that where we put staff and where we put professional resources, things tend to thrive. That often happens in worship, right? And so if we do not have that similar investment in our children and our youth and our family ministry, I don't think we can expect things to grow without resources. The other thing is really investing in the professional support of religious educators serving in your congregation so that they have the resources to go to Loretta and to get ongoing continuing education. Because another reality in our country is that there are I believe that the number of children with neurobiological diversity is increasing at a significant rate. And so we also have to think differently about children's ministry programming that is radically inclusive of all of our children and mindful of the various ways that our children interact, perceive, understand the world. So we need a big cultural shift, I think, in religious education. So it doesn't look like school. There are great things that folks are doing across generation and not dividing people up by age, like allowing kids to divide according to how they learn in the world, if they need to do sports and action, or if they need to tell stories that really meets kids where they are. So it's an area of growth for us. And the metrics indicate that we need to think outside the box on what we've been doing. Thank you.
Yeah, as a research physician, we love what we measure, so let's measure and follow it.
Yeah, and then we can tell if what we're trying to do is actually making a difference or not.
Great, thank you.
I'm Frank McDonald from the Bellingham congregation, Bellingham, Washington, and you were talking about the faithful sustainers, but you didn't give any statistics. Do you know how many we have and how much it's collecting?
I cut some of the detail out of my presentation. I actually used something that I presented to the Board of Trustees at the UUA at our meeting just last weekend. That may be online, but I cut some detail out of this not to get bogged down. Do you know Brent? I was just having him go look at the old slides. Are you going to look? I believe we have 122 new faithful sustainers since January. And it's, maybe a couple 100,000. If you'll look for that old slide, I'll see if I can't get you the answer.
And the other question is, how many faithful sustainers do we have in UUA, and how many do we have here?
How many faithful sustainers do we have here in this room? All right, thank you. Thank you. The next question, how many faithful sustainers do we need?
Mary Lou Kennelly Dunlap from Napa, California. We support Black Lives Matter. In fact, I think this week we're having a discussion about putting up a banner on our church. But the minority in our community is not Black, it's Latino. And I'm just wondering what materials or opportunities or support you have for that community.
So the UUA has made significant investments on immigration rights over the last 8 years, really significant work. And so, one curriculum I assume is still out there from the UUA, which was part of our Commission on Social Witness, is Immigration as a Moral Issue. That is a great resource for helping congregations debunk the myths around immigrants and immigration. It's a couple years old, but it's a good place to help the congregation understand the reality of immigration in this country. we are increasingly trying to look at how we provide more resources in Spanish and multilingual resources. That's a growing area for us. So I think that's something else that when we get that congregations can share. I suspect you have some sibling congregations here in the Pacific West who might be able to be helpful to you as well. So a lot of the work from the UUA has been about immigrant rights and fighting for immigrant rights, and that's been the focus. So there are a lot of resources on the UUA website about that work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I would just lift up that criminalization is an issue that connects both Black Lives Matter and immigrants, right? So I think another piece is to really look at criminalization in your own community and how it's affecting Latino communities.
Smoot Carl Mitchell, UU Congregation of Phoenix. Hi there.
Hi.
I was told to ask you a tough question, but I'm not going to ask you a tough question. So I appreciate the overview of what the UUA is doing, and really my question and the fact that you connected it to congregational giving. And my question is, how can we reinforce that? There are a lot of people that come new to UUism, and you ask, what's the UUA? And they kind of go, huh?
Right.
You know, what's the regional structure, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's lost on a number of people. What does the UUA do in terms of services to the congregations, which is really the base and foundation of our faith?
Right.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So I'm going to highlight those three things again. So when people say, what is the UUA? What do? They equip congregations for health and vitality through programs like OWL, through ministerial transitions, through congregational life staff that come in and help congregations when they have new ministers or they're in crisis. Number two, we equip religious leaders. So, you can tell folks, if you're served by a religious professional, a religious educator, musician, minister, they are connecting and their leadership development is supported by the UUA. So you want staff who are thinking about the best practices and what's ahead and committed to their own growth, and the UUA helps make that happen. The third piece is about providing the national voice for our faith and partnering on national levels with justice movements. We have this whole publishing house, Beacon Press, right, which publishes the work of organizers and activists that are on the cutting edge of academic work and organizing work about our country and the justice issues facing us. So those three things. But the other thing I would say is it's about the covenant that we have to each other. And that's actually the much more important thing, because again, it's not, I hope you see your giving to your own congregation and the larger faith, not about what you get, but recognizing that your gifts are helping congregations all around the country have access to resources that some of you are in congregations where you can provide a lot of resources for yourself, and many of you are in congregations where every RE curriculum and adult faith development resource and common read, all of that comes from the UUA. So you're actually supporting our collective faith when you give to the UUA. As a member of the UUA, your congregations have already said, we promise to support the UUA. Your APF is making good on that promise, is the practice of that promise. So it's about not being isolated, remembering that we're in it together.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Valentine. I'm from the Evergreen Fellowship in Marysville, Washington, and a past president. The last couple of years, I've come to the district meetings and the GA and heard about the changes in the annual member payment. And being in the Pacific Western region and hearing that it's 2 more fiscal years before it's going to happen, I need your help to tell me what to say to my congregation, who I've been saying every year, there's going to be a change in the funding schedule. And to go back to say, yeah, in 2 more years, it's going to happen for our region. So give me some good words to soften it or spin it so they don't look at me like, yeah, we've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, you can share that it's already happening in New England, Central, East, and Southern. So you can share that happened this next fiscal year.
So long?
Part of it is because we're trying to be in right relationship with all of your 4 districts here in the Pacific Western region, right? So some of it is not that the some of it is about the districts wanting to wait and take their time with the changes. Because and we are trying to be in right relationship with district leadership, and not come in and just say you're going to do it this way, right? But say this is the way we think it's going to work better for everyone. We want you to be with us in this journey, and we're trying to but move in that together. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's right. And we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So, but at least that's my hope. Because I think that regionalization does offer more specialized, comprehensive services, more teamwork for the staff, and more collaboration and connection. So,
there are some times it would have been good to say, this is the way it's going to be. On a totally different subject.
I'll quote you later on that, Lou.
I've been on both sides of that. Never mind.
Yeah.
I'm Lou Finney from the Bellingham, Washington UU Fellowship. And earlier you mentioned that you are working very closely with the board and with other members of your administrative staff. That is absolutely outstanding. You're absolutely right that that has not always been the case. Some of us suffered through some of that difficulty, maybe more than others. And my basic question is, are we anywhere close to being able to recommend to maybe move towards some rather profound changes in the way we structure ourselves? The existing structure has fomented a disconnect between the UUA administrative staff and the board. How far are we from being ready to entertain some profound changes that would eliminate those kinds of disparity?
Okay, great question. So we are moving on that front, and the board is going to bring to the General Assembly in Kansas City. I should have started off by saying, I hope you'll come to Kansas City. Please come to Kansas City. It's going to be great, General Assembly. But we are going to vote. The board is putting forth a proposal to enter a 2-year process for a comprehensive rewrite of the bylaws. Part of it will include the principles, because we've had some, we have the 8th principle. It hasn't come up in through the delegate process, but we want to open up that full conversation. How long that will take? The board is hopeful of 2 years. I'm mindful that we move at the speed of trust, and sometimes that does take a long time. But I can say that the board is very clear in saying we need a comprehensive rewrite of this, that this structure is not serving us. There's so much mistrust written into the structure. How long it will take to get there actually is about all of you as the delegates who will vote on whether or not changes come, right? So that's a key piece of it, is your support for the board really being imaginative and rethinking how we're structured. Time? Oh, okay. Well, so here are the Friends numbers. Over 800 current faithful sustainers, 260 who are new this year. The year-to-date income is $130,000 year-to-date. Last year's annual total was $117,000. So we've already raised more than $10,000 more so far this year from faithful sustainers. And so friends of the UUA, folks who don't do the monthly gift but make a one-time gift, or maybe make several gifts throughout the year but aren't signed up with the monthly gift, the year-to-date income is $792,000. So that's really coming close, and that's well over last year's full year total of $694,000. So we're talking about pretty close to $1 million from individual gifts of UUs to the UUA. Thank you. Yes, thank you. And it's last question. Thank you.
Priscilla Ledbury from First Universalist Church in Denver. I attended the caucus just before lunch on disabilities, and there were a lot of visible and invisible disabilities discussed.
Yep.
And the question came up as to who at the UUA would we approach to find out resources for the congregations in case they are interested in forming disability groups within their congregation, and also the effect on people so far as class and classism, and how disabled people are in the various classes.
Thank you for your question. So, Carrie, I'm going to look at you about the AIM program, which stands for. So there is a program called AIM, A-I-M, Accessibility and Inclusion Ministries at the UUA, and they actually have an assessment tool that you can use to look at your congregation, your building, your congregational life, your practices, and how you may be excluding or creating obstacles for people with disabilities to participate or feel fully included in your community. So AIM. And it's Equal Access is the group that has put that together. Equal Access is a group with of Unitarian Universalists who live with disabilities and their allies. And I did forget on my slide that I had Side with Love. So we have changed the name of that ministry to Side with Love, and did that deeply in collaborative relationship with Equal Access, and realize, and we are trying to be much more intentional about ableism and the way that lives in our language and our practices. And we have a long way to go, but we're siding with love, and you get your new t-shirt, but look for the resources under AIM.
And so far as classism, is there a separate group so far as social justice?
There's not a separate group on class, but there was the Commission on Appraisal just released a report around classism within Unitarian Universalism. And that may also be available on the website. That's also available on uua.org.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your commitment to Unitarian Universalism. So good to be with you. Take some flyers and stickers if you'd like.